wanting to welcome you all to this mindfulness in this moment, wanting to thank John, who is leading this topic today, and how teaching mindfulness can help deepen or support a practice. He's one of our MBSR teacher trainers here at the Mindfulness and Health Institute. He's also part of the Global Mindfulness Collaborative and the Mindfulness Teacher Training Alliance. So we're really grateful to have him here with us today and to share his wisdom. And so wanting to hand it over to you, John.
Thank you. I'll share my wisdom and hopefully not the cold I'm fighting, which I don't think can be transferred over Zoom, so you're safe. I'm not even sure it's a cold, it's just allergies. But anyway, welcome everyone. Good to have you here. Let's just start with a very short arrival and sit, and just taking a moment to find ourselves here. Taking a few very deep and deliberate breaths. Aware of your own environment, your external environment, and your internal environment of mind and heart. And just in these few minutes, allowing yourself to settle a bit, to fully arrive, putting aside whatever you just came from and whatever you may be doing later, and just allowing yourself to be present to this moment, to this time together. And if the eyes are closed, feel free to open the eyes and just orient yourself to where you are, to the people here. Thank you for that. I needed that. So thank you for joining me. Yeah, so this topic of, well, how did we describe it again? Teacher training as a way of deepening your practice, I think. I think the first thing I'll say is that teaching itself is a form of practice. And it's really important to take that in fully, because as we train to become teachers, whether we're becoming an MBSR teacher or teaching in some other capacity or some other modality, the teaching itself is the practice. And so when we train to be teachers, whether it's through MBSR teacher training or through some other one of the other trainings that the Mindfulness and Health Institute offers, or other trainings, we never stop. First off, we never stop training ourselves. And the teaching itself is a big part of our practice. So hopefully, if we've been practicing long enough, we realize that everything we do is part of our practice. But when we're teaching in particular, there is something that really allows us to recognize moment to moment what we are going through as teachers and how we are relating to the individuals in front of us, and how we are resonating one way or the other with them. And so the trainings themselves allow us the opportunity to really look more deeply at ourselves and our own practice. And when we then guide practice, and of course, any of you that have done training will hopefully have learned that, when you are guiding a practice, you are yourselves practicing. Um, and as you are yourselves practicing and then getting feedback from others on how you guided that practice, how do you receive the feedback? And how do you give feedback in that context? So it's all part of practice. So in that moment of giving and receiving feedback, you're also practicing right speech. You're also noticing what your response is to the feedback that you receive. So there's a lot that goes on in these trainings. And I think any of you that are in training now, or have done some of the trainings, whether through MBSR training or something else, you can attest to the fact that the training itself really deepened your practice, I hope. And I know for me personally, when I went through all the trainings, and I'm still in trainings, it makes me look at things so differently. And that's also part of practice. So we're continually exploring our own experience. We're continually exploring our own practice, and hearing from others what their practice is like, and recognizing in that process that whatever I'm experiencing is not necessarily any different than anybody else is experiencing. And as a result, it gives me confidence to keep doing what I'm doing, whether it's teaching or just meditating or just learning. So this is an ongoing process. And even once you've done one of the trainings or all of the trainings, it never stops. And at least in the MBSR teacher training, we all, sorry, those of us that lead the trainings are continually encouraging people to go on retreat, and not as a checklist item. Oh, I need to do this many retreats to do the trainings or to be certified or whatever, but as part of your life, right? It's not separate. And then teaching becomes part of your life. Uh, and and you and the biggest challenge for many of us is dropping the identity of being a teacher, right? Yes, we are teaching, but how strongly identified are we as being teachers? And uh, there's also something about this quality of humility, which is so important. We had somebody in one of our last trainings who was almost already certified as an MBSR teacher, but COVID happened and she hadn't been teaching for 5 or 6 years. And I offered to just mentor her again through a cycle that she was leading. She said, no, I think I'll do the whole thing again. And so she came to that as a fully trained teacher. And as a result was offering, of course, her wisdom to the class as well, but was also gaining from everybody else's wisdom. So that was quite an amazing thing. And I was interviewing somebody yesterday who's going to be in one of our intensive trainings, who himself has a huge amount of experience, but he still realizes that there's much more to learn. And so this is an ongoing process. And what I'd really like to do is just hear from you in terms of questions about trainings, whether it's MBSR trainings or one of the other training programs that MHI might offer, and Katie can relate to those or refer to those. And those of you that have done the trainings, just talk to your own experience about how it deepens your own practice. So yeah, please, anybody that would like to share their wisdom and what they experienced through their own teacher training, what did you discover about your own practice? Sorry, just one more thing. It's interesting because there was many years ago, I was doing an MBSR class specifically for a yoga teacher training program in New York. And I've always been amazed at how many people do yoga teacher training. And it's clear to me that people who do those training programs, and maybe some of you here have, are doing it really to strengthen their own practice, not that they're necessarily intending to teach. And I think it's wonderful. I mean, if somebody wants to do the teacher training but has no intention of teaching, that's cool. That's great, because so much can be learned in that. Um, it's kind of a financial investment, but it's okay. So, yeah, I'm happy to open it up. So please, anybody would like to contribute, please just raise your hand and speak up or ask a question in the chat.
Well, it's so good to see you again, John and Katie, and all the wonderful audience who are here. I didn't know what to expect, so I said, you know what, out of curiosity, let me just hop into this call, and I was free. Only one thing I have to say, it's been over 3.5 years for me and this mindfulness journey, and it has really impacted me in so many ways I can't even begin to describe. And it just started with a simple curiosity to see what's out there. And coming from healthcare, I remember I had a speaker who just introduced a capsule of mindfulness in where I worked. And that's where it led me to this journey. And 3.5 years down, and I have to say, and again, John is not, and nobody has paid me to say this, but I have to share, John is an amazing instructor, and what a great mentor. And I can't thank you enough from the bottom of my heart for getting me this far into the journey. And one thing I have learned, starting with the teacher training, it really deepened the practice for me. Uh, it is very intense, and when they say come after 2 years of your practice, I think it's a very good time frame for us to begin that journey also. And to be me, the biggest shift was attending the silent retreats, which is beyond description for me. uh, and for me, as a talker who enjoys talking, for me to be silent was the biggest, most challenging thing I did in the silent retreat. But when you go inwards and you realize, oh my gosh, all the things you need to sort out for yourself in your personal and professional journey. So I just wanted to share that with this wonderful group who is looking into joining the teachers training. And Katie, thank you. I have been listening to your body scans, which you have been sharing so graciously. I thank you. Thank you, John.
Yeah, something else I would relate about teacher training, at least certainly the MBSR teacher training, is that a big part of our practice is communication, and it's touched on obviously in MBSR in class 6 and 7, but in the training there is so much communication from day one. Speaking from the heart, listening from the heart. And as I said before, when you're giving feedback and receiving feedback, how do you receive it? Do you receive feedback and sort of with fear, or can you receive it with an open heart? And how do you then take that into your life? That to me is one of the biggest things that comes out of training. And there are moments in the MBSR teacher training program where the trainers, in terms of the intensive practice, the second level of training, where we are guiding the group, and then we give each other feedback in front of the group. And it's so much fun. And then we get feedback from the group, right? So there's something really special about those moments, because you have to put your ego aside completely and just receive, what people are sharing, which is coming from, a place of care, hopefully. Not I'm better than you, but just, oh, that's interesting how that came through. And one of the reasons I love training, actually, personally, is because it makes me a better teacher. And so, I think that as we go through the trainings, it not only makes you, it not only brings your practice to a whole new level, but when you start teaching, it will bring your practice yet to another level. Yeah. Any other questions or comments, actually, from those of you that are already quite experienced?
I'll go ahead and ask a question. I am a yoga instructor and I've been an instructor since 2014. And so now I'm just entering my phase of learning the MBSR route. One major question that I have is how do you bring together those two disciplines in a way that just feels very natural? Because they are somewhat different, but of course they're very similar to each other. So how do you do that? And then in a way, because my yoga practice and teaching is mainly for like underserved and marginalized communities.
Mhm.
So how to also kind of tailor the MBSR practice along with that to meld within the yoga teaching practice.
So that's a really interesting question, Mary, because the yoga that is offered in MBSR, I mean, those of us that aren't yoga teachers like myself don't even call it yoga. I might, but I really refer to it as mindful movement. Um, and John was very clear when he set up this curriculum, and maybe you've talked about this in your foundations, that these movements are sort of, I wouldn't call them sacrosanct, but they're kind of very specifically chosen. That said, because I've also done other teacher trainings, mainly through the breathwork program in England, which specifically is around people with severe chronic pain. The movements that are offered in MBSR for those people are way too much. So you develop other, they've developed a whole other level of movement. And so I would say you bring your knowledge of yoga into the teaching, even with the movements that are prescribed by the curriculum. And on the day long, maybe, and later in the cycle, you add some other movements that you feel might be helpful. You obviously will have plenty of alternative movements for those people who are challenged. And you know enough from your yoga teacher training that you can speak much more to what's going on in the body when you're doing certain postures, right? So obviously I've had a lot of yoga teachers take the MBSR teacher training, or take the MBSR class. And I remember once I had a really senior yoga teacher in one of my early classes. This is like 15 years ago. And I was, so I go through class 3, you go through the whole yoga routine. And I asked him afterwards, I said, did I do okay? And he said, yeah, it was great. That was just what I needed, So it was like receiving it from another person, for him was really lovely because he's so used to teaching, right? So it was, yeah, it was funny. This weekend, I was leading a retreat in Michigan, and I was staying with the person who was managing the retreat, who's also a teacher. And so last night she was meeting with her own sangha, and I just said, I'll just sit in with you. And it was so nice not to have to teach. I could just like be there, receiving the guidance from her. Anyway, I think because of your yoga teaching background or your yoga teacher training background, it's just going to I'd say really augment what you can offer as a teacher, regardless of what communities you're serving, right? So, but Katie, I mean, you've done a lot of the trainings, at least the MBSR trainings. I don't know about your other trainings, but I mean, how did you find it impacting your practice, deepening your practice?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. Thanks for the flip. Yeah, I think one of the biggest supports in my practice is really finding the areas that I'm stuck. Because when you're teaching, you can't really ignore that stuff anymore. It's kind of right there, fully to look at, and really appreciating the teachings of one of the required readings. I know it's for essentials through MHI and the Global Mindfulness Collaborative, but it's the Heal Thyself book by Saki Santorelli, and
Yeah.
really taking to heart don't look away from the bandaged areas. And so really by doing that, by whenever I see a bandaged area that I can feel myself automatically looking away from, and cueing myself to bring that curiosity, that has really changed my life in many
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that never stops.
Yeah.
But what I will say about essentials is that the goal of essentials is that you feel comfortable teaching and guiding and talking about mindfulness when you're through with essentials. You won't be ready to teach the whole 8 weeks, but you'll certainly be, assuming you do all the work, you'll be ready to, you'll feel comfortable, going out into the world and really guiding and talking about mindfulness and doing workshops and things. Yeah.
Thank you all. Inviting you to unmute as you go about the next moments of your day.